Fellas, we gotta talk about the YangGang. Andrew Yang, for those of you who are not familiar, is some tech guy from California. He doesn't have a ton of money, and he's trying to run in the Democrat primary. And his big thing is, hey, I think that we're going to have a big job apocalypse because we're all going to get replaced by robots, and I'm here to save us. He's not a big intersectionality guy. He seems pretty charming and normal. That, coupled with his very simple platform of robot apocalypse, $1,000 per month, that makes him pretty memeable for 4chan. So he's pretty much replaced Trump as the chief meme candidate, and hence we now have the formation of the YangGang. They've even made up these cool vaporwave-looking hats that are fluorescent pink. That's got that sort of 80s Miami tropical look to it. But in all seriousness, let's get into what he actually believes. So his basic premise is that technology is advancing really quickly, and that automation is going to put a lot of people out of work. Now, the problem with this, as folks like Elon Musk and Andrew Yang have presented it, is that, well, if the robots start replacing people, then nobody's going to have a job, and then nobody will be able to afford the things that the robots buy. So our economy will collapse because, you're going to have all this production, but there's going to be no demand for it. Now, of course, this is a fake problem. If this were to actually happen, it would be heaven on earth, because what they're describing is literal post-scarcity. If labor is no longer scarce, then nobody has to work. This is fantastic, because then labor doesn't have a price. It's literally free. This isn't a problem. You don't work to earn money to buy things just because it's some kind of fun game. You work to earn money to buy things because goods are scarce. So you have to produce things in order to gain value and produce value in the world so that you can consume other things of value. But if your labor is no longer scarce, and we can produce all these things that are labor intensive without human beings needing to do it, then this is great. Then everything's just going to be that much cheaper. Essentially, if everything gets automated, then the price of everything will fall astronomically. So even if everyone makes less in terms of money, everything will be just that much cheaper. So many more things will be able to be produced, or you'll be able to consume a lot more, even though you're producing very little. And let's say that things don't go that well. Let's say that, what really Elon and Andrew Yang are mostly correct, let's just say that, and that what's going to happen is that the robots are going to take over, and then nobody will be able to afford to buy any of their stuff because it'll be too expensive, even still, with the reduced costs of having zero labor costs. Well, then in that case, then nobody will be able to afford to maintain the robots and to pay for the cost of inputs for all the goods that the robots produce. So then nobody will use the robot factories. It will be an unprofitable business model. And it'll still go away, and we'll go back to having a non-robot economy. But if the robots are viable, if they're able to actually make money, then that means that people can afford the goods. Well, why can people afford the goods if they've lost their jobs to a robot and they can still afford the stuff? It's because it's that much cheaper. But anyway, leaving that aside, let's get back to Gang's policies, because that's more of a theoretical debate. Let's get into what he's actually talking about. His solution to the robot apocalypse is that, well, we'll redistribute income from the robots to people, and we'll pay everyone $1,000 a month. Now, this is a very good campaign strategy, because $1,000 a month is something tangible. Someone, an ordinary person, a voter, can think to themselves, if I had $1,000 more a month, what would that do for me? And obviously, everyone, pretty much in America, could use an extra $1,000 a month. That's very attractive. So it's a good campaign strategy. But of course, how will it be paid for? That's the question nobody ever wants to ask. You can't really pay for it by raising taxes, because, that would be trillions and trillions of dollars, and let me do the math on that. Okay, so what he proposed, if you cut out literally everything else that the U.S. government does, the freedom dividend, as he calls it, it would cost $3.84 trillion a year. If you take 320 million people and you multiply that, by $12,000 a year, because it's $1,000 a month, you get about $3.84 trillion. The tax revenue from last year is estimated to be about $3.6 trillion. So he wouldn't have to raise taxes or incur that much debt, more debt, to fund the freedom dividend if he cut out everything else. Now that's the tough part then. How do you cut out Medicare and Social Security? Cutting the military, of course, is another political problem, but at least it's not really a domestic problem. I mean, you could get rid of the military and it wouldn't affect the domestic society. It would only affect the military-industrial complex, which is very powerful. But let's say he was dedicated and he wanted to do it, he could campaign and get that done. If you cut out Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, then you're going to create social unrest in this country because people are used to that. That's an entitlement people already have. If you're getting rid of one entitlement to introduce a new one, you're going to cause a lot of problems because the old people go, I don't need $1,000 a month. Hands off my Medicare. So that'll create a big problem for Mr. Yang. So with that said, how do you pay for this? Well, it's probably going to be with the magic money tree, also known as modern monetary theory. The magic money tree basically is when the government goes to the Fed and says, okay, Fed, I need you to print me some money so that I can buy stuff. And the Fed says, okay, Mr. President, I'm going to print you some money and you can go buy stuff. Now, when the federal government does this, just like with any government across the world, whether it's the Weimar Republic or Zimbabwe or Venezuela, you're going to create inflation if you do this too much. Now, the U.S. has a bit more wiggle room because the U.S. dollar is so powerful and has such a good reputation. The U.S. government can get away with printing a lot of money, but not nearly as much as Mr. Yang needs. If Mr. Yang wanted to print, over $1 trillion a year, I think he'd have a big problem with that. Especially because he's printing $1 trillion and then putting it in the hands of people who are going to go out and spend it immediately. He would literally be printing money to fund consumption of, a lot of poor people. And they would be spending that $1,000 a month every month. That money would go right into circulation, and it would astronomically bid up the price of consumer goods. So ultimately, the YangGang would lead to massive inflation, probably akin to what Venezuela was used to before Chavez, because Venezuelan inflation was pretty bad forever, double digits certainly. So I would say that Mr. Yang's proposal would be at least that bad, if not a lot worse. And of course, once inflation gets started, it sort of compounds itself, because if you have 10% inflation a year, that $1,000 dividend doesn't mean much, in a couple of years. So he'll have to keep raising the dividend and printing more money to make it actually worth what it originally was, and that just won't work out. So YangGang is great for the memes, and I love the memes, and I've been retweeting them lots, and I'm thinking about even using a YangGang Avi, but there's nothing of substance here. He is fun to watch, though. So if you gained anything of value from this presentation of mine, I would appreciate you liking this video and clicking the subscribe button. I do put out daily videos, and I try and keep them relevant. I cover a lot of foreign policy and economic topics. That's kind of what I'm interested in, so stay tuned.